is The Guardian.
Reged Ahmad here on Gadigal land with the full story.
The female tourist said she heard a gunshot.
Was it a single gunshot?
Yeah, and she didn't see her companion after that.
The murder of British backpacker Peter Falconio and the attempted abduction of his partner, Joanne remains a chilling crime that's endured in the Australian psyche.
The most important thing to my family now is to find Peter's body.
What happened next was a horrific ordeal that spawned documentaries and a film.
I would like Bradley John Murdoch to seriously consider telling me, Joan and Luciano and Pete's brothers what he has done with Pete.
Murdoch died last year, still refusing to give up the location of Peter Falconio's body, despite one last attempt by police.
I need you to have a think about if Peter Falconio was your son and somebody knew something about where his body was.
Don't know anything about it, okay?
I just want you to think about it, all right?
Not thinking about it, I've thought about it. I've thought about it for 22 years. They've all understood what's going on. I've said the same story over and over and over, and now you're here at the last minute because I'm dying.
Today, Queensland correspondent Ben Smee as police try to finally close the case on the murder of Peter Falconio. It's Thursday, the 30th of July. Hi, Ben. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You've reported on this case over the years, and it's a crime that's been described as culturally defining. Why has it held this sort of horrific fascination in people's minds?
Well, I think it's partly because of the nature of the story. You have two young British backpackers who were on an adventure of a lifetime through the outback of the centre of Australia. And also, I guess it's a story that appears in some level to come straight from a horror film. I mean, that we made a horror film that was inspired by this case, Wolf Creek. I mean, this story tugged on a lot of heartstrings at the time, and it also played to a lot of people's worst, kind of almost their most base fears.
Just remind us about what happened, because many people will remember this case. It had a lot of media coverage. Essentially, what happened that night?
Joanne and Peter Falconio were both from Yorkshire. They're both travelling in a van through central Australia, and they were ambushed by Bradley John Murdoch, who's an Australian man who had a really good knowledge of the outback of the country roads, and he attacked them on a very straight, very remote stretch of highway near a little town called Barrow Creek, a few hundred kilometres north of Alice Springs. He took out some sort of homemade handcuffs, some cable ties, and shackled Joanne. And I believe the thought is that he was fundamentally attempting to attack her, to take her somewhere else to attack her. And he shot and killed Peter Falconio there on the roadway. And sort of thereafter was, sort of a mystery, a manhunt, a process that took several years before it was really identified that Bradley Murdoch had conducted this attack, and thereafter a trial. But now, more than 25 years later, we've just passed the 25th anniversary, still some degree of mystery about this case because we still haven't located the body of Peter Falconio.
And there was remarkable detail about how Joanne hid in the desert for hours.
Yeah. I mean, a really straight stretch of road, the pitch black, a little bitsy sort of scrub by the side of this highway. And when Joanne, kind of fighting for her life, had managed to escape from Bradley Murdoch, she went to the roadside and hid in the scrub. And of course, in the pitch black, it made it quite difficult for Murdoch to find her. She hid for about 4 hours, and she told rescuers later that if she'd heard or seen a car coming past, she wouldn't come out because she was fearful that it might still be her attacker. And she'd waited for a road train, a big semi-trailer truck, to come by, and eventually flagged someone down who took her back in 9 or 10 kilometres to the town of Barrow Creek, to the pub where she was able to call for help.
At the beginning, some people suspected Joanne of the murder. Why was that?
I think in the absence of a narrative that made sense to people, perhaps it was easy to cast suspicion towards a person that was there. I think it kind of exposed some problems with the way that the media and society operates, that we were sort of casting our eye in that direction. But there certainly was some suspicion. There was certainly some questioning of elements of Joanne Lees' story when she's someone who we know we have a much better understanding now, 25 years on, of how trauma affects people and how people react in fundamentally different ways to trauma. But we really did try at the time to interpret the way Joanne Lees acted after that as somehow indicative of innocence or guilt, rather than really having an understanding that she'd been through something quite horrific.
And before we move on to the case today, there was a remarkable moment in the trial where she had to demonstrate how she moved her bound hands from the back to the front.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the suggestions, I mean, I think the defence case in this case sort of sought to poke holes or sought to play into a lot of those sort of suspicions or concerns that people had. And when Joanne was asked to demonstrate how she got out of handcuffs, she sat down on the courtroom floor and moved her hands from behind to in front of her. And I mean, people talk about the O.J. Simpson trial and the moment where the glove didn't fit. Like, this was a very similar moment of courtroom drama where, in a moment when that element of her story had been questioned, she was able to very convincingly show us that, it actually made sense, and that she was, and explain to us how she got out of that situation. I think it had a really big impact on the rest of the trial, and also probably the public kind of narrative in the longer term.
Fast forward 25 years on, as you say, a lot of time has passed. Bradley Murdoch was brought to trial. He was found guilty, and he's now died, still in prison. What did you think when you watched the video that police have just recently released as they questioned Bradley Murdoch about the location of Peter Falconio's body?
Well, I certainly wasn't surprised at the response that they got.
I need you to have a think about if Peter Falconio was your son, Quentin, and somebody knew something about where his body was.
Don't know anything about it, okay? You've been told on that answer. Right, move on.
He never admitted through trial and through a very long incarceration to having committed this crime.
Around the bush, because I'm just going to cut it short every time.
Okay.
I know nothing. Know nothing. I've said this for 22 years. I know nothing. You keep asking.
And, really the criminal profiling really reinforced that he never would.
Because we think you might have information.
I don't have the information. This is what I'm trying to say to you. Yeah. I don't have this information.
And we have put a lot of stock in the idea that finding Peter Falconio's remains, really the key to that was to getting Bradley Murdoch to tell us where he was. So I think on some level, I think that was the Northern Territory Police attempting to show us that they had really made a go of attempting to get Bradley Murdoch to tell us something about what he had done with Peter's body. But I certainly wasn't surprised at the reaction, which is a very typical of anyone who has had experience with Murdoch or has heard about Murdoch, kind of a stubborn, almost aggressive kind of response to say, look, it's got nothing to do with me.
What have the Northern Territory Police said about why they put that video out?
Well, they said it was put out to mark the 25th anniversary of the attack. Certainly, the Northern Territory Police say that they haven't given up hope of finding Peter's body. There's still a reward in place for anyone whose information leads the police to Peter Falconio's body. But I think they've said this is really just us showing what efforts have been made, and perhaps from them a last-ditch attempt for anyone who might have information to come forward. Though what we do know about the case really is that in terms of the people who would know what had happened, really is Bradley John Murdoch, unless he's supposedly told someone, which it doesn't really appear that he's done. It seems as though he's really stuck very steadfast to this idea that doesn't have anything to do with him.
Coming up next, where experts think Peter Falconio's body could be. Police can't close the case until Peter Falconio's body has been found. And you've been speaking to a British expert who thinks that they may have a lead. But first of all, why is it so hard to find the body to begin with?
Well, we're talking about an incredibly remote, vast area. So if you were to, for anyone who wants a UK frame of reference, it's like the distance between Alice Springs and Barrow Creek and the attack site is about the distance between London and Leeds. We're talking more than 300 kilometres. And what we know is roughly the time the attack took place. And we know roughly the time later, in the early hours of the following morning that Bradley Murdoch was seen at an Alice Springs service station on CCTV camera footage. And that leaves about 90 minutes of time unaccounted for, where we can only presume that he has done something with or buried or hidden Peter's remains. Now, Joanne Lee said that he drove south, and so if we're to presume that he drove south rather than at some point doubling back to going north, it really leaves us with this 300-kilometre stretch of road where, feasibly Peter's body could be. So we're talking about, stretches of road that are very, very remote, that wouldn't really be stumbled upon by people. These aren't places that are frequented. These aren't places that might be subject to some sort of development or subject to some sort of environmental phenomenon that means that remains could be washed away or that something could have happened to them. So on some level, when you talk to experts, that's a good thing in terms of potentially finding his remains, because they are likely, wherever they are, to be largely undisturbed. But at the same time, we're talking about a very, very vast area. And so it's simply kind of knowing where to begin to a search is probably a huge part of the issue and a huge part of what we might need to reckon with if we are to continue to look for Peter's body.
Well, this British expert you spoke to has been involved in the Madeleine McCann case. What does he think can be done to try and finally find Peter Falconio?
Yeah, so I spoke with a British expert. His name is Dr. Mark Harrison, and he was the UK's National Search Advisor for many years, or the National Search Advisor to the UK's police forces, more accurately. He then worked in Australia for many years with the Australian Federal Police and has worked on a number of high-profile cases where we have been looking for bodies of people we presume have been killed as a result of homicide. And he uses a technique that sort of combines elements of criminal profiling with geoforensic techniques, so kind of like more technical search techniques, to kind of first and foremost come up with or try and work out the sites at which make sense that a body has been hidden, and secondly then use quite advanced techniques to then search these sorts of sites. So Mark Harrison was brought into this case. The British government paid for him to be involved with the Northern Territory Police at the early stage. He had access to all of the evidence, the complete case file of the case, and he did 2 reports for the Northern Territory government. Those reports narrowed down the likely disposal sites for Peter Falconio's body to 5 potential locations. Now, what has happened since is that the Northern Territory Police, they say they have searched those sites. They've said they have used that report to inform the way they might have continued to look for Peter's body, but they've never really followed through on what the report recommended to them, which was to go ahead and conduct quite advanced technical searches of these locations. They've given us a statement when we first started writing about this issue saying that resources are limited. We obviously will relook at this report, but what we know is that we haven't really seen a search in the way that report envisaged, or something that is on our side here, if our aim is to find Peter Falconio's body, is the way that search techniques and technologies have improved over the years. So at least according to Dr. Harrison, it is possible that we might be able to now conduct a search using more modern technology that has a reasonably good chance if we are able to find a location of returning a body. And I mean, he also says that having done some quite recent additional work with an FBI criminal profiler, that he's narrowed it down to 3 potential sites, but one that he thinks is very much the most likely body disposal site.
And where does Dr. Mark Harrison believe the body could be?
In his terminology, the most likely site for Peter Falconio's body is a disused racecourse, remarkably close to the attack site. It's a place that has already been searched by the Northern Territory Police using kind of old-fashioned search techniques, walking through the place, for instance, riding up and down with motorbikes, using metal detectors. These are things that, at least according to Mark Harrison, aren't really going to locate a well-hidden body.
Police have also opened up the evidence box. They've been releasing some images that we haven't before seen. I mean, could that mean that they might then go back and repeat the search along these recommendations you describe? Could there be a renewed interest in finally trying to close the case?
Look, it doesn't seem as though there is the will at the moment to go back and search, at least in the terms that Dr. Harrison, who did the initial report, had suggested. We're talking very, very highly specialised search techniques and things that I think are just fundamentally beyond the capability of a domestic police force, equipment that they simply don't have on tap, expertise that certainly wouldn't be expected to be had within sort of an ordinary state or territory police force. I don't know that they're necessarily looking at doing those sorts of high-tech searches, but that's certainly not to say that they're not looking at what their next step might be.
And what is the point of then releasing those images?
Look, I think from a few points of view, the Northern Territory Police at the moment would be trying to get their head around what to do next, because we have put for 20 plus years most of our efforts towards finding Peter Falconio's body in the basket of Bradley Murdoch knows, and he is the key. I was in the Territory in 2016 when the Northern Territory passed no body, no parole homicide laws. And there was only one case in the Northern Territory that fit those criteria, which was this case. It was really the government attempting to send a message to Bradley Murdoch, look, if you want any chance of ever getting out or of ever getting parole at the end of your sentence, you really need to tell us where this body is. We know that there's a large reward, which I think was premised on the idea that Murdoch might have told somebody who might then come forward with information and collect the reward. It really seems increasingly like, well, particularly now that Bradley Murdoch is dead, that the idea that getting some information either first or second hand from Bradley Murdoch that locates Peter Falconio's body is no longer really an option. So we need to start thinking about, if we are serious about still searching for Peter Falconio's body, what is the next option and how else might we be able to go about looking?
Ben, just finally, what would it mean? How important is it for Joanne Lisa, Peter Falconio's family, to finally find his body?
Well, I think it's incredibly important. I think from the point of view of a family who went through what the Falconio family did, what Joanne Lees, who was Peter's long-term partner at that point, went through, to simply know that the chapter isn't closed off. To know they were, from Joanne's point of view, to have gone through such an experience where there were suspicions cast at her. And while ever we haven't found Peter's body, those suspicions, they remain in kind of small conspiratorial corners, but those suspicions still remain and still get cast around. I think for Peter's family, I understand his parents are elderly now, and for them having some sort of closure, some sort of finality, to know that this case is now closed and that we have done all that we can, I think is a very, very important thing. I think it's probably also important to reflect on why we do continue to search for bodies in these sorts of cases, which is because it is important to know full stories of what happened. It is important to be able to, let families know that their loved ones' remains are not unaccounted for. I think there's a comfort that it brings people knowing that we have done all we can.
Ben, thank you so much for talking to us today.
No worries, thank you.
That was Queensland correspondent Ben Smee. This episode was produced by Miles Herbert. Sound design and mixing by Lou Hill. The executive producer of Full Story is Hannah Parks. Don't forget to subscribe or follow Full Story wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Reged Ahmad. See you soon.